Welcome, everybody, to the Good Data Podcast. We have a great show for you today. Nabeel Mahmood is our guest. I got unexpectedly lucky when Nabeel came to our studio. He just happened to be in the building, and I was able to snag him for an interview despite the fact that he had never heard of me. And he was great. Nabeel is a strategic CIO, which often means that he takes companies and turns them around into profitability. He serves on multiple boards and is an advisor to CIOs and CEOs across a number of different industries, including banking, tech, manufacturing. Nabeel has worked in the global tech business for 18 plus years. He's been through mergers, acquisitions, global expansion, creating new business models, tech innovation. He's just a leader and a motivator. He's managed big data, cloud, like ERP, IoT, mobility, data centers, all the technology from the grid to the chip. He's just an all-around interesting guy. We had the kind of very focused, engaged conversation that just makes this whole thing worth doing. Let's go. Nabeel, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me. This is, it's kind of an honor to get people that I haven't met before in the podcast to sit and actually go through something new. So the great thing about some of the podcasts that I've recorded so far is they're very technical, very focused on specific tech issues, but then getting somebody in to talk about something outside of that is fantastic too. We've always talked with entrepreneurs and we talk a little bit about management, and your background is in management. So I just wonder, how did you get into that field of actually talking to the C-level and being in that exec suite?
So, I mean, at times, when I look back at it, it's more of a luck of a draw, right? So in college, I grew up being an athlete. And, for me, everything is very structured. It's binary. I call myself for my life to be ones and zeros. There's yes or no. There's no maybe. Mm-hmm. So having that sort of a personality kind of, led me into more of a management role and being very decisive and, throughout my career and kind of leveraging on the ability to understand and look at things from a different perspective. Nothing is in a box. I'm kind of like, what's outside the box sort of a person. And taking a look at it from a different perspective. I mean, I try to look at things from a very different perspective. I mean, everything has got a different story to tell in a way.
But was that something that you made a decision to go ahead with a product or not go ahead? Is it to hire somebody, not hire somebody? I mean, is it just everything like information paralysis that can happen? So how do you avoid getting too much information and getting stuck in it?
All right, so it's all about analytics, right? So too much information at times is probably bad. I would kind of associate that with golf swing. I mean, the more you think, the more you stink sort of an approach.
Right.
So just the right amount of information is actually needed for me to make a decision. I like to evaluate things, people, personality, and so on and so forth. But there's also that gut feel, right? That plays a significant part in deciding if you're going to move forward with something or not, or hire someone for that matter or not. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of aspects to it, like people, personalities, technology itself. I mean, data points and whatnot. So yeah, I might start with a lot of information, but I start narrowing it down fairly quickly.
So you told me before we started that you had worked on turning around companies.
Correct.
And that's not always the easiest thing to do because they have a lot of bad habits going in. And you have to find some way to cut through it and make a change. So first of all, how do you decide what companies to work on that turnaround and which to say no to?
Well, I look for the underdogs. I look for the small, medium companies under $100 million, really. Mm-hmm. Or that's who I like to work with. And the reason for that is that they're willing to work with you. I mean, they have bad habits, but they're willing to learn. Mm-hmm. And especially, if the senior management wants to take the organization to the next level. all of it goes back to the willingness to change. If they're not willing to change, it's not really worth spending the time and effort. But if they're willing to change, yes. And typically organizations, that I'm engaged with, they come to me versus me seeking them out. And that kind of just validates the fact that they're in need of dire help.
Right.
And it makes, a working relationship very healthy.
So I would think it would be uncomfortable to go in and make changes. So to me, a lot of that has to do with the soft skills.
Correct.
And would you mind talking about that a little bit? Just what specific skills, what kind of working with people and personalities you've realized are most important for you?
So one of the things that I learned early part of my career was, and that's the lesson that's learned from being in the School of Hard Knocks is you've got to be willing to listen to people as well and understand where they're coming from, and portray a persona that you are with them, you are for them, and you want to work through them. Yet at the end of the day, you have a strategy that you need to execute, and you basically want to have them on board. I mean, in a way, I kind of sound like a politician, right? But that's the nature of the beast. I mean, you have to be able to convince people, and you need to be able to create a team environment.
Well, so there's not just the team environment, but there's also making changes on, you said that your background is in tech.
Correct.
So making some of those technical decisions is also important. So do you see a trend of mistakes that companies make in their technology sector that maybe you've been able to cut through and help with? Or is that not really the point of...
That's actually a great question, right? So in the tech industry, the cool thing is that we create a lot of buzzwords, we create a lot of hype, and people just start to follow it. Today we need cloud, we need blockchain computing, we need big data. I kind of oversimplify it for a lot of these people that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if it's blockchain computing or big data or artificial intelligence. It's really data, right? Artificial intelligence for me actually has existed since the 1950s. Right. I mean, it's nothing really new. I mean, we've had it for a long time. I mean, it's what we're marketing and how we're marketing now. So the challenge with a lot of these companies is that they actually get on this bandwagon and they start to disrupt their business because they don't really have a subject matter expert and or a leader that can help them if it's really needed for them or not. And if it's needed for them, what's the proper development or deployment strategy? So they waste a lot of time, effort, and money, and create a disruption within the organization where the remainder of the people in the company want to be part of it, but they don't know what they're going to do with it, or what's the value add for it, or how can they be a part of it.
Right.
So in my capacity as a concierge CXO, when I go into these businesses, I kind of start digesting and evaluating the need of it, and if it's really something that needs to be deployed, or if we need to actually just terminate the project.
Right. That's interesting in terms of sort of the cognitive biases that, people have a bias to action, and people have fear of missing out. And then people have a bias towards continuing what's happening rather than ending something because I forget what that one's called, but, loss aversion. That, if you've started something, then it's a loss to get rid of it. Whereas
Correct.
If you've never started it, then you have less of an aversion to not doing it. So I wonder, that to me signals that you have a very strong understanding of your own personal psychology to not get caught up in those kind of traps. Is that something that you've worked on to not have some of those biases?
Well, it's life lessons really.
Yeah.
And I believe you've got to learn from your mistakes and put your emotions aside.
Right.
People get attached to things very, very quickly. And I don't know if it's actually just the DNA, the fact that I've actually traveled the world, or not have to worry about taking my belongings with me anytime I move. It's probably just come natural to me, not to emotionally get attached to anything, because we're going to leave all of it behind.
Right.
So I believe it just came natural.
Well, also you're in a unique position where you're a concierge CXO, so you come in and as needed, you're doing work to make a company better, but you didn't come in with the baggage that the company already had, so you can make those decisions without feeling as though you're stuck continuing what you're already doing.
Yeah.
You come in with fresh eyes, and so you have this, Warren Buffett is somewhat notorious for having a laser focus on, okay, here's disinterest. It's, being disinterested in that kind of emotional element. And that can be a superpower, this ability to not get caught up in some of that stuff. And I wonder, in terms of cutting through some of those personality issues, getting to a point where you are not worried about offending someone, but yet don't offend them. That's a real skill. Are there any, can you think of something, you were talking about cyber security recently, and that's something that a lot of people have trouble with. And it's almost like there's a cognitive dissonance where changing passwords and getting proper passwords and getting security, physical security, network security, internet security to a level that it needs to be is actually changing people. It's not just changing the systems, it's changing mindsets. So that's a roundabout segue to getting back into cybersecurity and thinking about what are the kind of key programmatic thought changes that need to happen within the industry to get cybersecurity to where it needs to be.
So it's a multifold question.
Yeah,
so
there was a lot there. Sorry.
Yeah. So let's start with us as human beings and individuals. We are a creature of habits. We do the same thing over and over again. When I go and speak at conferences, or do business analysis for companies, or even in boardrooms, one of the things that I've always noticed, and it's kind of baffled my mind, is that everybody tries to go sit in the same spot that they sat in the last meeting. Right. So we follow patterns, right? We do the same thing over and over again. And that's kind of carried over into how our passwords are as well, for a lot of people. I mean, it's your pet's name, your kid's name, a combination of the last four of social, first three of your social, date of birth, so on and so forth. So people in general believe, again, that's my take on it, is that it's necessarily evil, that you have to have a password. Well, why do you have to have a password? And if you're going to have a password, I mean, why can't it be oversimplified? And, why can't we have a password as password 123?
Right.
And I've seen that. I mean, I've seen people, using their ATM cards, and it's their date of birth is their PIN code.
Right.
So it's kind of scary. But I also believe that actually us being technologists and being in the industry have actually put these people into that position.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is that there's a lot of lack of education, a lack of understanding, and people just buy everything, right? I mean, it's easy to sell to humankind.
Right.
So having said that, that creates a fear factor for me, I mean, on a daily basis, that you've got invasion of privacy as a concern. People put everything on social media, and there's a lot of good technology in the back end. I mean, we talk about artificial intelligence, for instance, being one, data mining, big data. And we do not think through any of that. We put all of our information out there for anybody and everybody to see. And if you look at it, all of it is actually in patterns as well, right? You take vacations at a certain time of the year, go out in the evenings at bars with certain type of people at certain times. I mean, it's all patterns, right? So we're leaving these digital footprints behind.
One thing that I think is funny is that, social media, a lot of times people use their dog's name or their child's name in their password, and then that's littered all over your Facebook profile.
Exactly.
So, it's like you haven't thought about that connection between those two. But anybody who's doing that social engineering, it's one of the first places they're going to look.
Exactly. And all of that data is available.
Yeah. To think in terms of the social engineering component, is that something that you almost put yourself in that hacker point of view to figure out how to infiltrate and then how to guard against it?
Yes. I mean, I actually position it more to the executives. that they are the ones that need to be actually more concerned about it.
Right.
Because
they're
they have
also
a lot
the
more
worst.
to lose. Exactly. They're the worst. Absolutely. I mean, I've seen instances, I've, been with some of these executives globally where their password for their iPhone is 1234.
Right.
So if you guys have that, make sure to change it.
Right. These days, it is interesting that there's more of a move towards biometrics. With the iPhone X, it does a face scan.
Facial, yeah.
And there is a higher level of security possibly, but there's also a higher level of ability to technologically game that system to make some sort of a light array or something that mimics the face. And once that technological barrier is overcome, it ceases to work. And that's one of the dangers of biometrics. And I worry about that personally.
Yeah.
That, now we're moving from a password world where the only way to hack that password, if it's done correctly, is to somehow get in the mind of the person who you're trying to get to.
Correct.
Whereas now biometrics cut off somebody's thumb and suddenly you have access to everything. Where do you see the future of that security coming from?
Well, I think there's going to be multi-factor authentication that's going to have to come into play. But then, I mean, from a consumer's perspective, I don't see that in the very near future. Maybe everybody will have a chip that authenticates.
Yeah.
And I know there's a couple of companies out in New York that are kind of looking into it or have done something around that, but more around the lines of artificial intelligence. But I've also been reading, that there is a vision out there that we're going to have a blue chip of some sort in our body that's going to be the second layer of authenticating your access to systems.
That would be interesting. It's a little scary.
I surely do not want that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like that's kind of like that movie Repo Man in a way.
Right. Yeah. Suddenly your body becomes your password, and then your body is worth something.
Exactly.
Which is a little bit disturbing too. I just was reading that Google is now putting out hardware security keys, sort of similar to RSA, so that there's that two-factor authentication through Google, which is interesting.
The question I'm going to ask, how much do you trust Google?
That's the problem. And that's one of the opportunities of blockchain is maybe you can get rid of that third party and have a more distributed trust factor. Do you see that in intersecting the InfoSec world?
I do. I think blockchain computing is going to significantly change how we do things over the next, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
I wish it was a lot sooner.
Right.
But it's going to take a little bit of time. I believe the challenge with blockchain computing has been that it's not been positioned correctly. For years and years, people thought that Bitcoin was blockchain computing.
Right.
Which is kind of silly. I mean, I even go at the conferences today, and a lot of people think that's the same thing.
Right.
But it's not, and it just wasn't marketed correctly.
Right.
I believe now we're getting to a point that there is a little bit more understanding of what blockchain is, what Ethereum or Bitcoin really mean. And that's creating a little bit of a concern in the data center marketplace as well as to what's going to mean for the folks that are involved in colo, wholesale, and cloud in particular. Yeah. But that transformation is needed sooner than later.
So to talk about that a little bit, Bitcoin is really just doing one algorithm. It is solving hashes based on a single algorithm. But Ethereum is actually, there's a Ethereum virtual machine that can run arbitrary code based on that blockchain that is distributed computing. And that allows things like smart contracts and the ability to not release money or somehow create a contractual basis that doesn't have a third-party arbiter.
Correct.
Right. And so that's the power of Ethereum. And it's very important. That's why so many different new coins are based on Ethereum, on that technology. Ethereum in some ways is the incumbent on that. Do you know of any other kind of next level players on that?
I haven't really come across or seen or heard of any at the moment. But I'm pretty sure, over the next few years, someone else is going to pop up.
Yeah.
And that's kind of exciting.
Yeah. It's a crazy world too, because right now we're still in the infancy of that Ethereum virtual machine, where that still computationally is very expensive. Like if you were to somehow hack together a way to run Windows on that, it would cost you millions of dollars to run a second because of how that's not, it's not, I don't even know if it's Turing complete and able to run any type of system, but in terms of the actual compute that's happening, there's a lot of backbone to that to make it work. And I wonder if in the future there's going to be more utility to that. And that's something that excites me, just to get off topic a little bit. I think that using
I believe you're going to craft a term digital utility as we move forward.
I think that would be great if we can move the cloud into something where there is no Amazon. That's very doable.
Absolutely.
We have to take a break. We'll be back in just a second with Nabeel Mahmood. Today's episode is brought to you by Greenlane Design. Greenlane is a full-stack design, bid, build company focusing on data centers. They've developed projects from BOD to finished turnkey build for many different types of companies, including colocation, high density, and enterprise. If you would like to get a free assessment, go to greenlanedesign.com, click on contact, and mention the podcast. And we're back. You said that you're working in manufacturing.
Correct.
And there is some technology associated with RFID and scanning, and that all has to do with blockchain. Is that something that you're interested in? Or?
Absolutely. It's something that we're looking into, not something that's actually on the radar right now. I believe one of the key initiatives that we have is machine learning.
Right.
And we've cut down roughly in the 18 to 20% of our labor costs because of machine learning.
Wow.
And of course, the data integrity and accuracy. Before we were kind of sort of like a day behind as to what the real production numbers might be. But now we are able to capture that information on a real-time basis. And also, the way I look at it is that before, if I was running 2 shifts of 6, 12, 16 hours, and then I have to worry about people getting hurt on the job, somebody calling in sick, affecting the production cycle. With machine learning and a lot of automation that we've actually done, we are now capable of running 24/7, 365.
Wow.
And I don't have to worry about, pay increases.
Right.
In California in particular, we're looking at, almost $15 in the next couple of years as minimum wage, which is one number. And then you've got to add another 25 to 30% on top of that number that the employer has to pay for, benefits, insurances, and taxes, and so on and so forth. So that $15 employee really now is almost a $20 employee for me. So that's why we've got a key initiative of actually machine learning and automation. So
automation specifically, you're talking about actually using machine learning to program some sort of automated, like I'll say a robot, to complete a function that otherwise would be kind of human necessary. But the technology around that has improved so much where the robot can, over time, improve the task because of that machine learning.
Absolutely. With machine learning, there's an introduction of robotics, right? And then there's also further enhancements in it to be more accurate. So I'll give you an example that in this particular scenario, if we were producing X amount of quantity as a human, the robot can actually do X plus 10 in a lesser amount of time.
Wow.
Because there's less human intervention.
Right. So I was reading recently that Amazon has sort of machine learning robots that are on their shipping side, and that each time they build a new robot, they actually have to teach that specific robot how to do things.
Correct.
That you can't necessarily take that learning and take it from one robot to the next and just iterate that way. You have to work that one through the process of learning almost like it's a person.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's fairly accurate.
That's crazy.
Well, it's still in the infancy stage.
Yeah.
I mean, over a period of time, I believe it will be just like migrating data from one laptop to another,
Right.
or from one infrastructure to another.
But almost from just like a mental image of having these things go to school.
Yeah.
and start as infants who know nothing, and then each one has to learn in its own way. It just seems like such a cognitive shift for me to start thinking about robots as real workers.
Mm-hmm.
So is that something? I mean, do you worry about the jobs that might be moving to automation? Do you think that there's going to be additional jobs that come up? I mean, trucking looks like it might turn into a automated, with driverless trucks. Is that something that you think about the job market? Is it not something that worries you too much?
Yes, I do think about it. I don't think it worries me too much. I believe, as we are getting away from the labor aspect, there's other opportunities that are being created. I also believe that we, as a society, need to work more on vocational schools. We need to produce, more subject matter experts.
Right.
To kind of oversimplify it is, I don't see a goldsmith anymore, really.
Right.
I mean, people don't go to school for trade. They have a bunch of degrees that don't really mean anything.
Right.
I mean, and then we keep issuing these, liberal degrees. I mean, I don't necessarily want to get into that, but
right.
I believe we need to work more trade schools. I mean, let's produce people that are CCIEs. Let's produce people that have an interest in cybersecurity, cyber warfare, cyber threats. Let's produce people that have an interest in robotics or automation, and they don't need a college degree for 6 years to, work on something.
Right.
I mean, I believe we can, have platforms that are 6 months to a year to at least get them started.
Right.
I mean, maybe it's the right thing for them, maybe it's not, but it's better than being jobless.
Right. Well, I've worked a lot with programmers over time, and there are a number who are self-taught that are fantastic at their jobs and never took one computer science or programming class in their entire lives. And the background to that is incredible. That
Absolutely.
There's so much wonderful learning out there. Like I was just talking about learning Python, the language, and there's just free classes out there online that are fantastic. Maybe it's because I have the background, but
Well, I think it's not just that. I think there is a level of interest as well, right?
Right.
And where does that come from? It's from exposure.
Yeah.
So we need to expose our society to that skill set and education.
Right. And it's this amazing time where we have the internet, which can democratize and allow more people to get some of that learning. But also, there's still that kind of element in a lot of jobs where even if you have that self-learning, you still can't get the job because they want to see that degree.
Exactly.
And that's,
So I think,
to see
anybody and everybody that's out there that doesn't have a degree and has that level of experience, feel free to reach out to me.
Right. The sort of the automation of hiring is, I think, a real problem personally. That, you go to a job board and you put in 50 different credentials and maybe you get the job. If they need 51, then maybe you don't get the job.
Correct. And the people that are actually in that recruitment process, they have no idea what the organization really needs.
Right.
So when I go and play the concierge CXO role in a lot of cases and have these discussions with HR people, they don't necessarily like me a lot.
Right.
Yeah, because they don't really have the understanding of what's needed.
So how do you go through the hiring process? I think it's one of the most important processes and most undervalued processes personally, to actually get good people and use a non-standard process to do that. So do you have any tricks of the trade that really work for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, my engagements really are at the executive level, like director level hires, what I actually, engage with. So I look at a few things. Of course, I don't want a CV that's 10 pages long. I really could care less. I want you to put bullet points in what you've been able to accomplish in whatever capacity. I mean, if you're a finance person, give me real information. I could care less if you've got a certification in JD Edwards or PeopleSoft or, Oracle EBS, E1, whatever the case might be. but show me what you have been able to accomplish in the financial aspect of things. As a technologist, I could care less if you've got a degree from Stanford or Yale, or you are the guru for C++. Right? Give me the level of intellect and a good understanding, because we can hire other people that are subject matter experts. Writing skill for sure. I believe that translates into intellect and communication style. So the less you say, it's typically better, in my opinion. But it needs to be to the point, and it needs to be able to get to open doors for one, right? I typically prefer like a 2-page CV, with key highlights, not necessarily, what you did in college, or what degree do you have, or, how many certifications you have on your resume. I like to focus on the writing style, right?
So you're looking for a cover letter?
Not necessarily a cover letter.
Oh.
Yeah, I'm looking for your accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
What have you been able to accomplish? And how professional your communication style is, because anything can be taught to anyone, right? As long as you're willing to learn. But it's how you communicate. So if you've got a good communication style, it kind of opens the door for you to come and talk to me.
Can I drill down a little bit into communication style? So are you looking for someone who conveys their thoughts particularly clearly, or are you looking for someone who can take direction and communicate in a listening sort of way, or both?
It's a combination of both. So, I mean, if you can take the direction and communicate, that means that you can write well and communicate your thoughts.
Right. So, and you're saying that brevity and keeping it a little bit more to the point is more important to you than getting flowery language or something like that you're
exactly.
really looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of looked at some of the LinkedIn profiles after we get these resumes, and it's kind of interesting how people exaggerate.
Right.
So let's be real.
Right.
I believe that's what opens the doors,
right.
And the next step in the process really is developing that personal relationship and understanding, and ensuring that the parties that we're potentially going to hire are willing and able to understand, and there is a good communication between both of us.
Right.
And if that works in the first meeting, then I believe that individual is the right person for us.
Right.
Then I also have a rule. I mean, if I can carry the conversation for more than 35 minutes, then with that person, or that person has my interest for 35 minutes, that's the right individual. I don't know how I came up with the 35-minute number, but over my entire career, less than 30 minutes, I lose interest. 35 minutes is a good cutoff for me. So if you ever, if anybody's listening and they do get my 35 minutes, you've got a lot of interest.
Wow. Okay. I'll go set my watch. Well, I guess, maybe that's a cue. No, I'm just kidding. But I know that we're taking your time, but so far I feel like I've learned a lot about management, and I'd like to kind of parlay that into what you're doing now and what you're interested in your current world.
So I mean, I like constant stimulation, right? I'm kind of like an entrepreneur. I'm not necessarily kind of like an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I like change.
Right.
And it's got to be continuous. So, I'm always willing to learn, because I don't have all the answers, and I believe the one that says that has all the answers is not the person that I want to be talking to.
Right.
So, education is key, and that education can come from a janitor. It could come from the most smartest people in the world.
Right.
And I believe that that's where I want to be. I want to continuously learn. To your question, what's next for me, or what do I want to do, or where do I want to be? I think I want to be the person recognized eventually, when I go down, as somebody that made a difference, made a change.
Right.
It doesn't have to be at the level of Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, but anything small. I mean, if I can change one person's life, I think I'll be happy.
Yeah. Well, I just talking with you here, I'm sure that you have. But is there a larger sort of societal or global change that you could see affecting and that you would like to affect through the work that you do?
Yeah, so particularly cybersecurity, I would like to create more awareness in the industry. It's something that we as a society, as individuals and as organizations, have not really paid a lot of attention to. I mean, I'll throw a blip over here. The fact of the matter that 65 to 70% of the equipment, the hardware that comes to the United States, is not actually manufactured in the U.S.
Right.
And all what it takes is a single line of code to self-destruct the system in 2050. So just think about that.
Yeah.
Right. There's none of it's actually regulated.
Right.
So I believe there's a play for regulating hardware and everything being connected. And as a society, we want data now. We want information at our fingertips now. And there's more and more of the growth of infrastructure, whether it be build out of data centers, well, with the computing power at your fingertips, a mobile device, all what you need to, think through is that device was potentially not manufactured in the United States, and it could end up having a single line of code that could potentially expose you as an individual, as a business, as a country, and that system could be self-destructed. We don't know who our friends or enemies are, so we need to be a lot more careful. And as a nation, I believe that we need to regulate that. We need to bring these jobs. You talked about jobs earlier. We need to bring manufacturing jobs, especially in the computing world, back to the United States. We need to manufacture equipment in the U.S. Also, software, applications, the application layer. We need to actually start doing more and more of that in the U.S. We need to introduce more compliance standards. We need to start regulating that. We shouldn't be able to publish any application related to finance or healthcare to the public without it going through a sequence of auditing. Right. And meeting those compliance standards.
Right. Well, so can I throw that to open source? So, being able to actually audit something is fantastic, and for the public to be able to audit, but you would like for it to go through a compliance audit from a government perspective before it gets to that point?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, I mean, I think another concern with that statement that I made earlier is that the government doesn't have enough knowledge.
Right.
So they don't know. So as a part of all of this, we need to educate the government.
Right.
We, I'm not asking for creating more government jobs, but I believe we need to help the government understand what all of this means.
I 100% agree. That right now our cybersecurity from a governmental perspective is too disjointed, and that there isn't a central authority on it, and it really feels like a problem.
It is, absolutely.
And, I have worked very tangentially on the electrical power grid and the cybersecurity around that. And that needs to be addressed because there are, it's fantastic what they do, but some of the pieces that are least protected are entries in, like facilities systems. That, what controls the HVAC is often housed in the same data center on the same network as the actual physical infrastructure. Often not, but that's how Target got hacked. There's still problems there. And I think that you hit the nail on the head with needing to make sure that those things are correctly identified and that we are 100% sure that those won't be attack vectors.
Correct. I believe we need to work on the foundation more than anything. We need to think through the process, right? So I'm a big fan of technology. Give me a new gadget. I love it.
Right.
But the challenge is that we don't think through it.
Right.
I believe we need to spend a little bit more time And, you know, it's only been a decade.
Right.
You know, iPhone didn't exist 10 years ago.
Right.
Or, I mean, if it was in its infancy.
Right.
Right. You know, the World Wide Web was there, but it's not what it is today.
Right.
Right. Bitcoin was a dark web.
Paper.
It was a white paper, right? It was a dark web currency exchange. So it's the adoption in the last decade that's resulted into where we're at today. And I believe we are right at that chasm where we need to step back and think through the foundational elements and understand what is the worst thing that can happen and what would be the root cause for it and plan around it, versus introducing all of this new technology and getting the buy-in of people, because it's getting more and more data from everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And it needs to be protected. Right. And you know, data is running all the businesses now. So, you know, as business owners, you know, somebody asked me, should we move into cloud? I'm like, well, yeah, sure. But think about it. There's no value add, really. I mean, the only thing that you're gaining is potential latency. Right. Right. It's going to cost you the same, if not more, in moving to a cloud environment. You're losing control of your data. Right. And then there is a fear factor of you know, government accessing your information more than they need to, or other people accessing more information than they need to. Amazon or Microsoft is not going to give you the service level agreement if there is a disruption in service that you need. Right. So maybe it's not the right thing. Right. Now, you can partially move some of the applications into the cloud environment, but you know, it needs to be regulated. It needs to be defined. It needs to be thought through. And I believe that's what we're lacking, and you know, that's going to create a lot bigger concern as we move forward. And you know, mark my word, if we don't address it now, in the next 10 years, I think we are going to be a society that's going to be a definition of idiocracy.
Well, on that positive note, Nabeel, thank you so much for sitting and talking with me. This was a fantastic conversation, and I really enjoyed talking to you. So
it was
thank
a pleasure.
you very much. That's our show. I'd like to thank Nabeel Mahmood for speaking with us.
You can connect with and follow Nabeel at nabeelmahmood.com or on Twitter at Nabeel Mahmood.
And thank our sponsor, Green Lane Design. JukeDeck created our music. Like, literally, go to jukedeck.com and it will create music for you. Just try it. JukeDeck.com. For Good Data, I'm Drew Farnsworth. Talk to you next time on the podcast.